Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Bench. I am your host, Brandon Stemwedel. We are going to be discussing with my guests today the 3 dimensions of coaching. With each dimension having a ton of information, we will be doing an episode on each of the dimensions. So we start off with the first dimension, the fundamentals or the foundation of sports. Before we dive into that, let me welcome our 2 guests from the organization Fellowship Christian Athletes, or FCA, Erik Lofald and Cal Barr. How you guys doing today?
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah. So Cal, let's start with you. Let's get to know you a little bit more. Why don't you tell our viewers just a little bit about yourself and what sport means to you?
Well, I'm 65 years old. I've coached since I was 21 at the college, high school, and youth levels. I've coached football, baseball, wrestling, rugby, softball, maybe a couple other things that I don't remember. So it's over 60 seasons of coaching, so at various levels. I started sport when I was I've got a picture of me having a bat in my hand when I'm about 2. That's my dad influence. My dad was my first coach, and I started playing baseball competitively when I was like 7. Played minor league baseball for a while, played college baseball, played college football, had a 6-day experience with the Atlanta Falcons back in '79. The getting cut from the St. Louis Cardinal organization was the biggest brick wall in my life, because I didn't know who I was apart from sport. And so I've done a lot of reflection since then on what sport is and how do I relate to sport and how does God figure into the whole thing. So sport is really, for me, it's a place to figure out who I am.
Yeah.
And we'll go in. I mean, I can talk all day about some things in that, but you'll need to guide me how deep you want to go in on what. So
no, I mean, you're just hitting the surfaces right now, and obviously, I know diving into these 3D pieces that it's going to be all about that too.
Well, I've actually coached soccer too. Yeah, I forgot soccer. So,
I was going to say, your daughter might be a little upset about that.
20 seasons of soccer at the youth level, up into low high school, so JV stuff.
Yeah, for sure. All right,
I
Erik,
even got licensure. You
do?
Oh yeah.
Which ones?
D and goalkeeper level 2, regional level 2.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember Sonia telling me about that too.
Yeah. So
got to give Sonia a good shout out in this too.
Yeah.
All right, Erik, I'll pass it on to you and see. So give us a little bit of insight about who you are and what does sport mean to you?
Well, I am a husband and a dad. So my wife, Rachel, my son, Tobias, my wife is expecting our 2nd child due May 2nd. So we're excited that the family is growing. A lot of our world revolves around sport. I'm currently the head football coach at Duluth-Denfeld, where one of my co-workers as the soccer coach, as the girls soccer coach. So know the community and the school very well.
Hunter pride.
Absolutely. That's the hashtag. I've been a football coach for 8 years. This is my 2nd year as the head football coach. I coached basketball at Duluth-Denfeld as well for 6 years. I was the assistant varsity coach and head JV coach there and had great experiences. Love sport. It's a huge piece of my life right now. It's always been a part, kind of like what Cal said, the earliest memories of sport for me were playing Nerf basketball in my parents' basement, as young as I can remember, and watching UMD hockey games and pretending I was, a UMD hockey player down in the basement with a net and a plastic hockey stick. Lots of fond memories of growing up. I pretty much played almost every sport, growing up. So lots of different experiences, but my wheelhouse is football and basketball. That's where I kind of settle in.
For sure. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Like sports in general for me were just like that outlet that I needed to just be in my own little bubble. It's growing up as a kid, like that was just the place that I was able to, that was my la la land. That was like my candy land where I was able to just get away and everything just evolved around that. Like, before we got on here, we talked about the Chicago Bulls and and being able to go to Bulls games. And that was a big part of bringing my family together too. So totally can relate to that. So to dive in a little bit more, both of you are a part of FCA. So why don't you give our listeners a little bit of insight of what FCA is?
Well, FCA is a parasports ministry. So I describe our call as, we're basically local missionaries. So you're familiar with church, and they send missionaries out to places to proclaim the gospel. And that's kind of what we do in sport. And we believe that in our culture, coaches and athletes have a tremendous amount of influence. And so the platform is sport, the vehicle is sport, but as Cal would say, as we dive in more, we understand that there is something also a little bit broken about sport. And I think that's where 3D coaching comes in a little bit, is this transactional culture that sport is kind of fallen into, where the athlete is not a person, he's a player, and that's their identity is just as a player. And so especially at our high school level, we see a lot of transactional coaches relationships. So not only do we want to share our faith with coaches and have our coaches live out their faith in front of their players, but we also want to see those transformed lives transform sport. So pretty deep kind of calling. For me personally, it's meshed the two things that I love the most. That's God and that's sport, and has given me a great deal of pleasure and pain as I've navigated 8 years. Cal's got a lot more years under his belt in ministry, but yeah, I think that's just kind of the tip of the spear for FCA. Is just it's a ministry that wants to see the world transformed. And we believe that coaches and athletes are some of the biggest influencers, the coach especially. And we use a quote from Billy Graham that says a coach will reach more lives in a season than most people their entire lives. And that's a powerful statement on the influence of a coach.
Yeah, for sure. And they also say too that, a coach is more likely to get a kid to go clean their room than the parent is.
Absolutely.
Right? So the power of what a coach is phenomenal. And I love the fact that meshing the two together is incredible. Go ahead.
We use we basically say coach says, right? Coach says is kind of the catchphrase we use. Is coach says go to class. The kids tend to listen, and so the coach has a lot more influence in this culture than some parents do, and teachers. So we definitely see that.
Yeah. Well, that stems from the whole idea that people engage in sport on a voluntary basis. It's a choice they make to participate. They're not mandated to participate. You're mandated to go to school. But athletes choose to play. And so it has a stronger connection to their heart and their will. And so it gives the coach an opportunity to leverage that to help kids grow. And at some point you're going to bump into yourself in sport. You're going to reach the end of your skill, of your career, and then that's a brick wall. It's like, okay, now what? And if coaches are only coaching for the game, their influence on that person ends when that brick wall shows up. So if you're coaching a kid for the game, most high school athletes are done the end of their senior year. If you're coaching for the sport, the end of your influence is there. But if you coach the whole person, which is what 3D is about, 3 dimensions of living, if you coach the whole person, then I would argue that you extend your influence into the life of that athlete for their whole life. It's going to go into their marriage, it'll go into their family, into their children, and how the children are shaped. And then those children will have lives and become adults. And so you can have intergenerational impact as a coach. And so I view coaching as a deeply spiritual activity, because you're dealing with the hearts of human beings, of people, of dreams, of aspirations, of identity, questions of identity and purpose. So it's done in this thing called sport, which is kind of an artificial construct of time and space. Okay.
Yeah.
Baseball diamond has a different shape than a soccer pitch and a football field and a basketball court and a hockey rink, but they all have an artificial confinement of space, and time is measured differently in each of those sports. And so it's different than real life, but it gives us a place that's kind of a safe way to play or to explore.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you bump into things.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how to manipulate the ball with my feet, or I can't catch a ball, or whatever.
So it dives into the abilities of problem solving and giving a life skill.
Yes. So, I mean, in a different world, I just watched a show called Queen's Gambit on Netflix. It's about a chess player. And she had the ability to visualize the chessboard and to solve problems by watching the moves. And it was like a phenomenal visualization exercise. But that's it. The sport presents problems. And I would say that the sport is a gift from the creator, and that embedded in each sport are signposts to the creator. There are things that point the way. And if you look at what the demands of the sport are on the athlete, you have a clue as to what the signposts might be. And then we're going to be talking about this as we go into the other dimensions, but that's my frame that I come from is that there are signposts in the game to the creator. And so it gets away from religious language, and it talks about the world as we find it.
Absolutely.
And so that's, I think, the realities.
Beyond the Bench is sponsored by BiPro, the ideal lifestyle choice for athletes and health enthusiasts, by providing clean protein without artificial ingredients or sugars. Whether you're looking for a pre- or post-workout supplement or a quick drink on the go, visit motisports.com to receive 25% off your next BiPro item.
Absolutely. So I mean, you've already said something about the three-dimensional coaching, okay, or the three-dimensional platform. So what are the three dimensions?
1, 2, and 3.
1, 2, and 3.
The first dimension is the physical realm. And so that involves, all of your sports science, physical stuff, speed, agility, strength, power, endurance, your different energy systems. All those things are problems to solve. Second dimension is the mind, which includes emotion. And so this is all your sports psychology concepts. So motivation, confidence, dealing with emotion, team cohesion, goal setting. You can expand it into, visualization or self-talk. I mean, all those things are kind of wrapped up in the second dimension. And the third dimension is the heart or spirit. It's kind of that invisible. Increasingly, each dimension goes from physical to abstract or non-physical. So a coach who's coaching all three dimensions has to coach the non-physical aspects of a person. So when we get to heart, we're talking about identity, purpose, who am I, character, how am I supposed to behave? How do I sort out who I am and what I'm supposed to do in the world? Significance, values, self-worth. All those things are pushed in sport.
Right.
And you can see the impact on a player that hits the wall. They just stop. They're devastated. They're stopped.
For sure. So today, just because all of that right there is, we can dive into all of that, and we could spend probably hours upon hours just hitting each one, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, when I started in the beginning with my viewers, it's just like saying, hey, you know what? There's so much here that we really need to talk about this, because as coaches, sometimes we only teach in the one dimension, don't we? And we're missing as coaches, including myself even, is that we focus so much on what we were taught and how we were taught that we missed out on some of these things. So focusing on just the first dimension, what is something that you have seen in sport, even from when you started, Cal, to now in sport, of just the physical side of how we've evolved and changed? And has it been positive or negative?
Wow. Well, we used to play with wood bats. I would say that the information available to a coach is so much different than it used to be. I remember I went with my dad to a clinic done by a guy named Danny Litweiler, who was the Michigan State University baseball coach when I was 9 years old. And he had some simple tools, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Now, oh my gosh, you can get so much information on the physical dimension in your sport online. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is good. It comes from good sports science, the studies. There's just so much more available, and Erik dealing with that more than I am now with football. So.
Yeah, Erik, what have you noticed in getting in the physical side of it? What are you noticing in athletes these days?
Yeah, I think especially right now when you're talking about COVID and coaching in a pandemic, the information that has been put out online is staggering. And so I just think access is a huge piece for the physical realm, first dimension. And Cal touched on it too. A big thing of the first dimension is X's and O's.
Yeah.
So it's game planning, it's watching video, it's a lot of that practical stuff that most head coaches and assistant coaches, that's their strength is the first dimension. That's why it's most high school, college, professional coaches are excellent in the first dimension. What we've actually found in youth sports, some of those parents and volunteer coaches need help in that first dimension. They're good in the second and third, as we'll talk about later, but they don't have a game plan. They don't have a practice plan. And so a lot of that too is just evolved. So, I think about 8 years ago and to where I am now, I just think, a lot of access with like Glacier, you'd have to go there. All their clinics are online right now. So you have a vault full of videos and information from coaches, and you have coaches on social media. Twitter and Facebook are a huge resource, especially Twitter, as coaches are on there just wanting to talk ball and just craving relationship because they're not able to meet, like they would and plan like they would.
Well, here's a simple way to put it. In 1977, 78, we had 16 millimeter film in college to watch our games, and we'd watch game film. Mm-hmm. When I signed with the Atlanta Falcons, they videotaped practice. So every night we were watching our practices, and I went, oh, we should have been doing this a long time ago. I learned so much more every day. I learned more in one day than I did in half a season. And now with video, huddle, it's incredible. The feedback loop is so much quicker, so much better. The other thing I would say that's changed too is specialization, early specialization. Kids are choosing a sport much earlier to try to pursue money, scholarships, status, Mm-hmm. And it used to be we played everything, you just because you couldn't play year round. There weren't opportunities, and so that's changed a lot too.
So on that note, like, have you noticed when athletes start specializing sooner, are you noticing a dip in other areas in their life? Are you noticing them? How is it going against like the individual person? Do you know what kind of get what I'm putting down there?
Well, I think the research indicates that the earlier specialized, some sports you have to specialize earlier. So sometimes it's dictated. So gymnastics and, body development, you are locked in maybe to early decisions. But I think football is probably the latest one, mm-hmm. Because it's just more raw athleticism. that's demanded. But there's a lot of social loss. You get out of your community, you get more isolated, there's more pressure, more tendency for overuse injuries. So you're seeing a lot more Tommy John injuries in baseball, a lot, more knee injuries in especially women's soccer and whatever. So that's the part, but I think you lose the overall development of the player. I mean, the best players tend to not specialize early.
True.
A lot of them specialize after college.
Mm-hmm.
Or particularly after high school. So it's, 17, 18, you look at any top athlete and you look at their career, they probably played multiple sports until they were 17, 18. And then they had to choose.
Yeah.
Part of it
I mean,
depends on the
I remember
system,
I was like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a benefit mentally. You need a break from your sport. You need some downtime, so there's a lot of extra stress on the body, which causes these injuries because they don't get a break.
And that's because of the specializing earlier.
Yeah, we're in a hurry. Our culture is in a hurry. And I don't care how good you are when you're 14. That doesn't matter. I want to know how good you're going to be when you're 24, as a professional, or, if that's your goal. And then I think it robs a lot of joy along the way.
So a lot of the pieces that you've already mentioned of creating the joy and wanting to continue on with like the physical dimension of it all is enjoying the sport as a whole. So Erik, how do you get, when you're talking to other coaches, how do you get them to realize that, yes, about the X's and O's, but there's other parts of the physical side in this dimension that are missing? What are you noticing from other coaches that are missing these in the first dimension?
I kind of come back to, the first dimension is easy for a lot of coaches. And so I don't see a lot of people missing. I think maybe there's some misinformation, like Cal was talking about early specialization, is that doesn't come from a lot of coaches. That comes from outside sources, whether that's a camp, a recruit, a clinician,
parent.
Parents, obviously parents are, but where does that information come from? It usually doesn't come from the coach. One of the resources that we love to use in our coaches ministry, or we're working with any coaches, is What Drives Winning by Brett Ledbetter. Phenomenal resource. And he's talked to the elite coaches. He's kind of a basketball guy, but they've branched out to every sport now. And the elite coaches at the D1 level want multi-sport athletes. And the luxury that most of them have is they get a choice. So I think that's maybe the issue with maybe some there's just some misinformation, but I don't think a lot of that comes from coaches. I think it comes from outside places, which obviously coaches have to deal with, because that leads to entitlement for a lot of kids.
That entitlement piece. I've struggled with that. Like my entire life I've struggled with it, it's just, I don't even know how to like phrase it. It's toxic.
Well, it's embedded in our culture, especially right now. So it's everywhere and it's pervasive. And so it's subtle in the ways that it happens.
You mentioned before about in the youth side of it, that they are better off at hitting the second and third dimension, but they lack the first dimension most of the times. So how can those coaches that are really proficient in the first dimension, how can they help in the youth better?
Yeah, I think you know this in the world of soccer, you have your feeder programs. And so that's one of the big things that I've done when I became the head coach is really reestablished a relationship with our feeder program and made sure that their coaches felt equipped, that if they wanted to run our offense, that we were open to sharing our playbook and having clinics for coaches. So being really intentional. We've done a lot of work with the Salvation Army in Duluth here. They have a pretty robust youth basketball league. In fact, they're basically the only youth basketball league in Duluth, in the Duluth Superior area right now. So if you're in kindergarten through 6th grade, you're playing basketball at the rookie RBA, the Rookie Basketball Association is what they call it. So we've done a lot of work with Chris Mallett, who's the director there. And she's just coming up with a complete redo of their program, starting with core values. But a lot of that is just resources for coaches, websites to go find practice plans, shooting drills, games, all the things that some of these, because a lot of them are volunteers, and you know, and I know in youth sports that getting really good coaches is hard. The demand is high, and so sometimes you're forced to take on coaches who aren't qualified in a lot of different areas. So, as the head coach, I think that falls a little bit, that falls on your plate if you want to see your players come with basic fundamental skills. So I can't have a 9th grader come into my program as a basketball coach who can't make a left-handed layup. If they're right.
So it kind of comes down to the coachability of an individual. So when you're hosting tryouts and you're looking at a player, you have to see what are they able to bring on an athletic side, but also as a personality side. Am I correct?
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk a lot about culture, but if I would, we don't make cuts at the football level because we can have a pretty large program, but being involved in basketball and knowing soccer and knowing hockey, this is my preference, I would take a kid who fits better in our culture than somebody who is going to be toxic, who might be a better player. Now that's when we start talking about, as a head coach, do you really believe in your culture and your core values? Because that feeds and informs everything to making cuts and who, if it comes down to 1 or 2 players, that somebody who's going to fit better in our culture is going to elevate everybody else. And I've been a part of a lot of teams that we've had great players, but poor culture. And so we've underachieved.
This is pushing on the question of winning. So there is that pressure on a coach to win. So you go, well, this kid's a more talented player. So I can solve a lot of problems with that talent, but I'm going to have these other problems that are more character, kind of third dimensional problem. It depends on the values of the coach, what that decision is going to be. But I think one of the things we're touching into is in the American system, a lot of youth coaches are volunteer and they're not really trained. And so they don't understand the game very well. And so my first year coaching soccer, I didn't play soccer. I just was like, I think kids should have a ball in their foot. And the first practice I saw my daughter have at age 6 was she was standing in line waiting for a ball. I'm like, that's nuts. I'm coaching next year. Okay. She went to 13. She's done with playing soccer. Then I went back with Sonia and I went, okay, soccer is speed, skill. I don't know how to teach skill very well, but I can teach speed. So I taught all my kids how to run, and we did agility drills, and we made it game-like. We did fitness training. We used med ball throw-ins. Our girls could do throw-ins. Kelly Clune, she could throw it into the box.
Oh yeah.
At 15.
For sure.
So stuff like that, I learned that I had huge gaps in my thing, but then I went and got trained. So I think that's one of the, that's a big picture solution, is because skill matters. You have to teach the skills. That's the demand. That's the demand of the game, is there's certain skills you got to have. You have to be able to turn right and turn left. You have to use both sides and all of that.
Yeah. And Cal touches on it. I think you have to be, obviously, if you're going to be a coach who has some sort of longevity, you have to be good in the first dimension.
Yeah.
Very few coaches, very few communities or ADs have patience with a coach who loses year in and year out, at some point, most coaches are going to be let go, especially in the more competitive areas of the country. And so when we talked about, what does sport mean to me? I'm a highly, highly competitive person, and sport feeds or satisfies that competitive juice that I have. So I'm competitive in everything. I want to win at everything. And so as a coach, I have that same competitiveness. So do I want to win? Absolutely. So when I talk about choosing a kid who's going to have better character than better skill, that's because I know in the long run, we're going to have a better chance at winning as a team. Like Al said, a lot of the problems that we're going to talk about in the second dimension are issues that coaches are dealing with right now that stem from, that could, to me, could be more proactive if you're really clear on your character, your core values and your culture, and it's going to save you a lot of trouble. But that takes some work. And one of the things about 3D coaching is it's a journey. It's a journey. And so the buzzword, right, for coaches is process. Trust the process day. Every day is a focus on today and the process. Well, 3D coaching is a process. And I've been doing it for 8 years, the framework that I've used as an assistant coach and as a head coach. And I'm still trying to figure things out because the athlete continues to change. So when you talk about the other big difference between what's different today, the athlete is different. The person is different. And so when I played football in 1997, when I graduated, coach could motivate me in the first dimension, make me run. He could yell at us.
He could grab your face mask.
Mask. Yep. He could punch a locker. And those things would motivate you. Those things don't motivate kids as much anymore, or you can't get away with some of that stuff. So that's a huge piece of what's changed as well in all dimensions is the athlete has changed.
For sure. Going back a little bit,
you can hardly swear in some settings. If you swear as a coach, that you can get fired.
Yep.
And really, if you think about it from a high school standpoint, it is a classroom. It's a co-curricular. It's an extension of the classroom. The same standards that apply to a teacher apply to a coach.
Beyond the Bench is provided by MOTI Sports. MOTI Sports is the ultimate youth soccer training tool, utilizing 3D motion capture technology to teach soccer skills and drills that can be studied from any angle. Coaches, parents, and players can download the MOTI Sports mobile app from the Apple App Store and Google Play. Check us out at motisports.com.
So why, so again, we're looking at the athletes now from the athletes that we were way back when in the glory days, right? And I remember the same thing. Like I've already said this on this podcast before, is I had a coach that I did something wrong on the field. I think I called my dad and not coach. He was my coach. And he went on the soccer field, grabbed me by the arm and dragged me off the field. And he said, sit there until you figure out what you did wrong. And we're in the middle of a game and he went on the field. And nowadays, if I put a toe on the field, I'm gone.
Yeah.
I'm gone. But that was okay back in the late 90s. Okay. I won't do that again. And so I figured out it did set a precedence. It was okay, wait a second. My dad is not a dad here. He's my coach. And my teammates need to know that he's a coach, not a dad. There's a separation there. So for those volunteer parents and such, how could we as coaches equip them to know that and to say, okay, look, there is a separation here. Your kid is on the team, but there's an overall piece here. And what you guys already said is that the second and third dimension they're really they're better at. But how do you teach the X's and O's to that volunteer group without separating the two, right? So how do you do that?
Yeah, I remember the first day I stepped on the football field as a coach. I'd say the second year, because the second year I was put in charge of the 9th grade team. So I had my own practices. I could come up with my own practice plan. We had our spot on the field, and so there was freedom. And I remember I hadn't experienced it my first year just as an assistant JV coach who was just learning and just kind of getting his feet wet coaching football again. But I remember vividly on that first day going, these kids are completely different than, like, I tried to coach like I was coached. And I think that's the default for a lot of volunteers, right? They default back to how was I coached, if they were even coached in that sport. So, say youth basketball. So they default back to how they were coached. And this is a part of the overall issue with youth sports that we found working with Salvation Army. I ran a rec basketball league for about 6 years here in Duluth. Is this, when that happens and there's not proper coach training, this is where 3D can kind of step in, and really good directors of leagues provide resources for their people or training for their people. So what they default back to is how they were coached. And usually that is a model that doesn't fit with youth sports. So they try and coach, like they try to take a high school soccer practice and they replicate that with 6 and 7 year olds. That's not going to work.
Nope.
Or they go online and they find a practice at the Chicago Bulls, some plays. They want to run the triangle, right? and they try to install the triangle offense with their kindergarten basketball team. Mm-hmm. Like, those are some examples of what some structure can do, what 3D coaching can do, and having framework, having somebody who's leading these youth leagues or a head coach who is making sure that it's being done the right way. So there is some oversight. I think that's a huge part of that is, as a head coach or as a director of a youth league, there has to be a little bit of micromanagement, at least to start, to make sure that kids aren't being hurt. Because that's what we're going to talk about too, is why do kids walk away from sport? Well, it's not fun anymore. Well, that's because we have adult coaches or teenage coaches, whatever, at the youth basketball or hockey or soccer or whatever it is, have robbed the joy from these kids because they've imposed an adult structured kind of practice when that just doesn't work. So.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was just thinking about this. How, like, the question that came up in my head was, how do you break the cycle? How do you break it for these volunteer coaches? Like, how do you break it?
That's the issue, is that it takes a transformational coach. It takes a different type of coach to be that chain breaker, and that's what Cal and I want to do. That's part of our call, not only on FCA, but now just as a head coach who has influence. And this, how much influence that head coach has. Mm-hmm. How do you wield that influence? And that's what we're trying to do with coaches through 3D coaching, is just to get them to understand that this holistic piece that we're talking about, all three dimensions, means having a feeder program that is healthy. That's a big part of what we work with coaches. When you're gonna, the first year that you were the girls soccer coach, you have to be thinking through all of these things. And I remember going into my interview for football, and I had to think through all that. I came up with all of that so I could clearly present that. And we're going to talk about it later, but that starts not just by thinking about, what offense am I going to run? Mm-hmm. It starts with, what are the things that I really value? Because your program is a reflection of your core values, right? As the head coach, you're the CEO. It's top down. And if there's a schism, like we had a little bit of a schism with our football feeder program, where there wasn't a connection for many years, and that hurt us. Mm-hmm. That's hurt us with that disconnect. And so if there's not that top-down approach and it doesn't trickle down, even if you're like, I'm not actively running my feeder program, right? It's a separate organization, but I have to be involved.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the chain break too, is entering into some difficult, mending bridges. There's some politics involved for sure, some diplomacy, being humble, all those things will help kind of break that chain.
Yeah, it gets to the question of why are you coaching? You know, if I'm coaching so that my kid gets a chance to get a scholarship, well, that's a different approach than I'm here to create a learning environment for these children or kids, and I want to see them grow as people. And sport is the context in which we have this conversation. Otherwise, I don't talk to those kids.
Right.
They're not coming to me because I know something. They're coming to me because I got a ball and they can play. And they want to play. You know, and then I go, well, try this. And then they try it and they have success. And so you build trust. But so it's the coach has to understand the physiological development of people, the skill acquisition process. They have to understand how to build a community, which is what Erik's talking about, you know, the values and your culture and stuff like that. But, you know, so the first dimension, there's a lot of stuff. And the better you get at that, the better your players are probably going to get on the physical level. The problem is that it takes character to work through problems. When you hit the wall physically, how do you keep growing? You know, why should I work so hard? And that's a question kids are facing now with COVID. Why should I work so hard? I'm not going to get to play.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. When I had Shannon on here the last time, she was talking about how her daughter does not want to participate in sport, and she is one of the most competitive ones in the family. And her reason was because I don't want to play a COVID sport. She doesn't want the restrictions because of what COVID has brought onto her. She didn't want any of that. So she walked away from sport and put it into a different environment.
Yeah.
She's now working and putting that in her competitiveness in work.
Yeah.
And so it's funny you say that, like how have we, like for the X's and O's now with our current situation, how are we able to keep these kids on the physical side and keep them mentally engaged this whole time? I know, Erik, you had a really hard time this year for your sport in particular.
Yeah, that's the question. And I think that's the dilemma, is it's really hard just the fact of we can't gather, like we're not, it's mandated right now. We can't get together. We have a school district who said, you know, with most school districts in the state of Minnesota who have stopped all extracurriculars. So not just sport, but all debate, speech, theater, choir, band. And that's a huge, when you talk about, you know, the heart of a player, that's just in the mind of a player, though, that's a struggle. And yeah, I wouldn't blame, you know, a lot of kids. It takes somebody who has some really, you know, high end motivation, internal motivation to really get out and work in COVID. Like, so we put out, we were in season, we were quarantined because we were exposed to a positive case. So we were 2 weeks done. You know, we had 2 games canceled and then ended up getting to play one last game. But we put out workout programs for our kids to do that they could do in their house without any equipment, just basic stuff, fundamentals. And maybe 10% of the kids probably did that. You know, we kind of suggested they socially distance, do like a run together at Chester Bowl, local park here with a hill, just run up the hill, and nobody responded to that. So that's the dilemma. You can only do so much virtually. Some sports, it's easier than others. And, you know, you did some virtual stuff over the summer. You did some, and, you know, basketball, most kids can get a basketball and maybe dribble in their basement or go out in the driveway, even when it's snowing out, and do some ball handling stuff, do some even form. You could do some wall shooting. You don't even need a hoop. Some sports like football, what do you do? How do you do it virtually? Right. So yeah, that's a tough question. It's a hard question. I think that's the dilemma we're in is it's hard. It's really hard to do virtual. And then, like you said, kids who are highly competitive, they're going to find their competitive outlet somewhere else.
Right. The other question that I have too is, you know, for us coaches that are really good at this first dimension, how do we express ourselves in that way to be able to emphasize that and to almost get that release? Does that make sense? How do we get that out?
Watched a lot of film. Watched a lot of film. You pushed a lot of film out. Constantly, connecting with our guys over social media or any sort of app we're using to communicate. Like I said, watched a lot of Glacier videos, pushed those out to players like, hey, here's something you can watch. Even the week that, coming up with game plans and making sure that they're looking at the playbook online. I think that's maybe one of the answers to your question is that's where I found my release is, I still, I didn't have to quarantine because I wasn't a close contact technically. Mm-hmm. So I was in the office every day watching film. Mm. And I was preparing like we were going to play a game, even though I knew we weren't. So the game against Proctor that we were supposed to play that we ended up canceling, I game planned that whole week and put the playbook up like I normally would and did that stuff like I normally would and tried to communicate with kids as much as possible. But that's pretty much the only outlet there is you just continue to do what you would have done. So for soccer, you come up with your game plan the same way you would.
Well, I think one of the things you can do in the first dimension in COVID is you have certain movement patterns the kids have to master. Mm. So can they do that in their own space? And you have to break those things down so kids can understand them and so maybe then using questions to ask of the athlete to help them learn how to problem solve would be an approach I would take. And they can videotape themselves and send it to the coach, and the coach can give them feedback. And so you can use the technology to bridge the chasm. Even though you can't be together, you can at least get information back and forth through technology. And you can kids can set goals. I'm going to learn a new skill this week. Soccer would be probably a good one because a lot of ball skills you can do in the basement or in the garage or living room even. And so you're talking about patterns of movement. You're talking about defined skills. You can get video feedback. You can I think MOTI has some video that show the pattern.
Yes.
There's a plug. Look at that, boy, Cal.
So I mean, that's the whole idea is that, and you can do that in any sport,
Absolutely.
I mean, for baseball, you just need a screen so that you can hit a batting tee and proper netting, and I can hit in my basement off a tee. Mm-hmm. Okay, I can get 500 swings in a day if I want. I can do soft toss. Teach my dad how to do soft toss. Boom, boom, boom. So there's solutions to that. It takes a little creativity. It takes money, maybe. It takes a plan. It takes goals. But the coach can help guide the process.
Absolutely.
And next year they're going to be better players physically. Then the question is now, how do you have to move into the second and third dimension because you're restricted on the first dimension, but maybe the best development you're going to make is in the second and third dimension. That's the biggest upside with COVID.
Absolutely.
Is it has pushed it into our face.
Yeah.
We're being force fed, and most of us are throwing up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that we've kind of really kind of saturated what the first dimension can really entail. So, I mean, we'll kind of wrap things up for this episode, and then we'll get on to the second dimension where we're actually focusing on the mind. And we'll dive in more on what that's going to look like during COVID and even pre-COVID, of what that looked like and how we can continue to drive that force going forward. So both of you, I really appreciate your time for today and focusing on the first dimension in particular, telling us a little bit more about what FCA is and how your calling and your ministry is affecting players, coaches, and even parents in all levels. So thank you both so much.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you. Wow, what a great chat about the first dimension with Erik and Cal. I'm excited to have them both back for the second dimension, which will focus on the mental aspect of the game. Special thank you to Erik and Cal for coming on and sharing their experience with the first dimension. This is Brandon Stemwedel with Beyond the Bench.
Beyond the Bench is sponsored by ByPro, the ideal lifestyle choice for athletes and health enthusiasts, by providing clean protein without artificial ingredients or sugars. Whether you're looking for a pre- or post-workout supplement or a quick drink on the go, visit motisports.com to receive 25% off your next BuyPro item.